Hi, welcome to Pandemic Academy. Tonight I will be the moderator. My name is Associate Prof. Dr. Selin Türkel. Ebru Hoca, Professor Dr. Ebru Uzunoğlu will not able to attend the show, but she is quite fine. Welcome to our show, Dr. Dan Staub. He's an assistant professor from Second Foreign Languages. We are happy to host you tonight.
Thank you very much for having me. I want to thank you, Selin, of course. I want to thank Ebru Hoca, and I want to thank the communications faculty for giving me this chance to have this conversation with you. I look forward to having this conversation.
Thank you. Tonight, Dr. Staub will be sharing his research findings actually with us because he has recently conducted a research with second foreign language directors, with 30 of them. So it's a very effective research and it's going to be very beneficial, I believe, for second foreign language teaching in these coronavirus times. So, Doctor, could you please talk about this research a little bit?
Of course. Thank you, Selin. I'm going to share some slides with you. I have a little background that I'd like to share with you first. Primarily, I will start with myself. I know this might sound immodest, but I think it's important for me to establish where I'm coming from. I'm originally from the United States. While I was in the United States, I was the director of the Office of Student Retention and Outcomes Assessment. So for many years, I've been working in quality assurance and, as it mentions, outcomes assessment, student retention. I've worked a lot in accreditation, different regional and program level accrediting bodies in the US. In Turkey, I've been very active as an external reviewer for the Commission on English Language Program Accreditation, which is known for its acronym CEA. I'm on the executive board for DEDAK. DEDAK, if you don't know, will be the accrediting body for language schools in Turkey as well. In 2019, I was the editor of this volume published by Springer entitled Quality Assurance in Foreign Language Education. And actually to kind of tie it into today's conversation, I have written on this previously about retaining students in online education. This was an article based on some research that I conducted in the US. Let's talk about schools of foreign languages for just a minute. You know that there are 208 higher education institutions in Turkey. According to YÖK, there are 140 schools of foreign languages across those 208 institutions. 107 of them are public and 33 of them are foundation, like the one at Izmir Ekonomi. My research that I will be talking about covered 30 institutions. I spoke with administrators from 30 different institutions, some of them directors of SFLs, such as myself, some of them directors of just the prep programs, but I got a broad representation from across the country, from Istanbul to Bingöl, from Samsun to Adana, and everywhere in between. Just to give you a sense of my methodology, I used convenience sampling, meaning that through my connections in DEDAK and the School of Foreign Language Directors, I was able to use my colleagues as sources for my interviews. Let me give you a little background about the School of Foreign Languages in case you're not very familiar with what we do, if you're peeking in from the outside of the institution. We have 4 programs in the School of Foreign Languages. We have a prep program, our intensive English language program. We also have our second foreign languages, ranging from Chinese, Japanese, French, Spanish, German, Italian. We also have, and Russian as well. We have an undergraduate program, and we have an associate's program, which is in our vocational schools, across our vocational schools. Currently, we have 108 full-time instructors, 29 part-time instructors, which gives us this semester 137 instructors, but that peaks somewhere around 150 instructors at the beginning of the year. This semester, We are running close to 320 sections across the whole School of Foreign Languages, and because of the virus, 98% of our instruction is conducted synchronously. A couple of pieces of data I'd like to share as well, I think that's relevant, was that at the beginning, before we even started teaching online, we started collecting data about our instructors' comfort levels with going online. And you can see from this blue line, there was a pre-teaching sense of rather discomfort among our instructors. But as you could see over a 1 month period, with the last collection of data being the green line, you could see that there was a steady and somewhat rapid growth in the comfort level of the instructors with the technology, with getting online, with interacting with their students online. So that also led to feelings that they were effectively teaching the material after a month, but at the same time, they didn't feel that the students were necessarily getting the material at the same level that they were instructing. And part of that is coming from this data here. We looked at two different metrics. One was the percentage of students joining classes and the percentage of students participating in classes. And you can see the red columns in the top graph represent after day 1, and then the green columns represent after month 1. So you can see there's kind of a obverse relationship between those two sets of columns, which indicated that the number or the percentage of students actually joining the classes decreased over time. And likewise, the participation rates dipped pretty low over time as well. So getting to the research that I conducted, as I mentioned, I contacted 30 colleagues from across the country. All of them were extremely willing and interested in participating in the study. I chose 30, not necessarily because it was a representative sample, but I felt that at the same time that it would have given me a good picture of what was happening, because I also chose different institutional types from foundation to state universities. I also chose different sizes of institutions. And so I thought it would give me a really good sense of what actually was going on in the first month or so of online instruction. So you could see the questions that I'm asking here. I mean, primarily I was asking, were you ready beforehand? What did you do once you started moving online? And I was also curious about what do you think is going to happen over time, going down into items 12 and 13. What are going to be the long-term impacts of distance learning on your program? And what is this going to mean for quality? Are you looking at quality now? What are you going to be doing about quality of education as we get down the road with online education? Some of the takeaways. Go ahead, Selin, you have a question.
When did you conduct this research? As far as we've seen, the first month is a very critical period. So I guess the timing is also important. Sure. So you ask these questions to directors after 1 month. When did you get these results? Sure.
It's a good question. It's a relevant question. And what I did was I started probably, this was one of the questions actually to the directors was, when did you start? And there's considerable variation. We think that here at Ekonomi, we started on the 23rd of March, and we think that probably many schools or most schools started at that time. Actually, there were many schools, or at least schools of foreign languages, that didn't start into April, the first week or the second week of April. So there was variation, although I was asking in the first month of being online, there was variation in terms of when the schools actually started implementing their online education. But essentially, to specifically answer your question, my data collection period was, let's say, the 5th of May until the 20th of May.
Thank you. You know, we were one of the beginners of online education, but not all universities have acted that rapidly, that fastly. So we have also understood.
Right. I wouldn't say that we were in the minority in terms of starting on the 23rd, but definitely there's a very high percentage of schools that did not start on the week of the 23rd. There were many that started the following week, the 30th, the 6th of April, and there were some that even started beyond that. There was actually a few schools that wanted to start the week of the 13th, and they announced it, but then YUK, the Council on Higher Education, told them not to start their online education and told them to wait until after the 23rd, after that 2-week period.
Exactly. Thank you.
So shall I continue with these takeaways, some of the takeaways that yeah. So in summary, I mean, some of the major takeaways were that first and foremost, this is not online education. It's not distance education. It's what is broadly being called emergency remote learning or emergency remote teaching. And it's just a rapid response to kind of maintain continuity of teaching. So it's getting instructors in connection with students and having them conduct some sort of educational activities. But I think there are very few people, whether you're talking to faculty members or you are talking to students, that would agree that the same level of quality of education from the face-to-face classroom transferred to the online environment. Another major takeaway was that reluctance primarily from instructors was widespread. A lot of them were very, very nervous, as the data that I presented showed. In the very beginning, there was a lot of discomfort, even though a lot of schools were using these learning management systems such as Blackboard, such as what we use, or they were using Moodle for many, many years. They were comfortable with using them as kind of like as a learning management system, as a repository, but not as a way to deliver education full scope. So there was a bit of reluctance that came from faculty members across the country that they were not interested, they were not ready. And in fact, in some of the public institutions, you saw retirements increase as well, because a lot of teachers were like, I'm done. This is it for me. I'm not going to go any further with this. I just can't handle it. I'm sorry?
Why are they so? You know, why do they feel discomfort?
That's a really good question. I think it gets to the notion of change. It's change. It's rapid change. It's very rapid change, and there are a lot of people who are very nervous when it comes to technology, and I'm not talking simply about using online technology. You'd be surprised how many people are scared around Excel, spreadsheets, and PowerPoints. And so to be honest, it's not that surprising to me that reluctance was this widespread. You know, there were some institutions that the teachers don't have computers. I mean, we had a handful of teachers who didn't have computers, and we were very fortunate that our upper administration made computers available, laptops available to some of our instructors. But there were institutions where there are institutions where they allowed their faculty members, again, I'm talking about the language faculty members, to take their desktops, put them in the car, and go home with their desktops, and take them and use them at home, because otherwise they would have no way to teach. They had no technology. At the same time,
to change one of the major, showing some kind of resistance to change is the most prominent reason, as far as I understood, followed
Yes,
by
yes.
technological one, if I were to paraphrase it.
Right. I will
Thank
get to a term called de-skilling in my next slide, I think, and we could talk a little bit more about this. But there's also the other side to this coin, which is resilience and innovation were also widespread. And by resilience, I mean that sometimes change can happen in a number of ways. I mean, one can be, okay, take the slow, methodical approach. And the other is, we must do this and we must do it now, and there are no questions asked, which is the approach that we were forced to take, for better or for worse. And once instructors kind of got their feet wet, once they got online and started figuring out how to use the LMS, whether it was Zoom or Blackboard or whatever mechanism the universities were using, the comfort levels started to increase, and as I showed in that graph earlier, they increased somewhat rapidly. I mean, in a month's time, most of our faculty members went from terrified to feeling pretty good about teaching online. And likewise with innovation in terms of finding ways to deliver the content, and making sure that their students remained engaged with the content and with their classes. Another common theme that I found was there was a lot of restructuring. And by that I mean that in schools of foreign languages, units and positions that were commonplace and were day-to-day positions sometimes became obsolete, whereas other positions suddenly became very prominent and very important. And so because of that, teams were created, special teams were created, special positions were created. And so there was this kind of restructuring that happened at a lot of universities as well. So if I can go on to one of my primary questions was, especially in early days, what were the major challenges? Well, these should be no different than the challenges we've experienced across the realm of online instruction. I mean, first of all, there's the technology, whether it's the students or the students and the technology, or the instructors and the technology. There were all sorts of issues there, whether microphones don't work, cameras don't work, internet doesn't work, et cetera, et cetera. Another major challenge was families. In the field of foreign language education, there are a lot of younger instructors, and they might have children at home. They might have extended families at home. And we all know this. We all experience this. I mean, you go home and there's maybe only one source of internet in the house, but 3 or 4 people are fighting over it. Or maybe 3 or 4 people are fighting over the same space or fighting over the same computer. And so that was a major challenge for institutions. I mean, particularly for the administrators, where they had to kind of balance, the empathy for the instructors and their families, while at the same time trying to keep the ball rolling and keeping education online. And as I mentioned in the last slide, there was this de-skilling was a challenge. I mean, de-skilling is a term that means that people who have become very skilled at something over their careers suddenly realize that they are not skilled at all in a certain aspect that is critical to their performing their duties. In this case, it had to be technology, right? So they're very skilled at instruction, but they're also very skilled at instruction in a classroom, in a face-to-face environment, where they're comfortable between the students, and suddenly they're thrust into this environment where perhaps they can't see the students, maybe they can't even hear the students, they're chatting with the students, learning how to use Menti, learning how to use Kahoot, learning how to use Collaborate or Zoom, whichever, creating assessments. All of these things are new skills that instructors had to learn very rapidly. And so that was part of that resistance movement. Of course, assessment, we all know what about assessment, the difficulties that assessment brings. And then autonomy. Autonomy really has been one of the major challenges in language instruction, unfortunately, students often think that the instructor is there to teach them, to entertain them, to give them the material, to give them the language, and their expectations outside of the classroom are somewhat low. But in the online environment, the expectation for them to work outside of the classroom is just the opposite. They have to take much more control of their lives. They have to be disciplined enough to show up for class and to pay attention during class. They have to be disciplined enough to do the work. And this turned out to be a major challenge, and it will be a major challenge going forward as we look at using more and more online education.
So the autonomy issue, may I ask something? The autonomy issue is something that's valid for, Turkish students, European students. Is it something universal? Is it something about generations, like Z generation, or
Absolutely.
Y generation?
Mm-hmm. It definitely is. I mean, I don't want to say, these Turkish students don't have any autonomy. I mean, you are right. It is somewhat generational. The students of this generation are accustomed to having things delivered to them in short sound bites, something they can easily consume, something that doesn't require a whole lot of critical thinking. And so there's not a whole lot of autonomy. However, I will say this. I mean, one of my commentaries about the Turkish education system is that because of the university entrance exam, and I guess I could extend that to the high school entrance exam, until recently, and still to some degree, it's been rote memorization. It hasn't been about developing yourself, being a critical thinker. It's just how well can you perform on assessments, and that obviously has a significant negative impact on autonomy. But let me add, Hojam, let me ask one other thing about autonomy. It's not only students; it's also instructors. There's a huge lack of autonomy among instructors as well, because they're used to being, and I'm specifically talking about language programs, where they are being fed the curricula, they're being fed the textbooks, they're being told, here are the pages to cover this week even. And so to some degree, they have not had to rely a whole lot on creativity and figuring out how to deliver the content in a new way that's going to reach the students effectively. If I may, I will continue on to what I see as the post-traditional environment. And that's looking down the road as we get beyond, I shouldn't say, I don't think we can say beyond COVID, because I don't think any of us know when COVID is going to end. But at least when we come back in the fall, well, let me start with the summer. First of all, we all know that the summer is probably going to, in some institutions, it's going to be non-existent. And in some institutions, it's going to be 100% online, just a kind of replication of the spring semester. But looking into the fall, there's definitely going to be much more of a hybrid or a blended model. Obviously, because of social distancing, the requirements of social distancing. And that's
just about it. What about the future? They're asking questions about it. What about the future? How will the future look like?
Right. Well, the future will be, at least in the short term, and the short term might be the next year or two. It's definitely going to be either fully online, or it's going to be much more of a hybrid or a blended model. Now, I know that there are institutions in the United States. I haven't heard this happening in Europe, but there are some institutions in the United States that are going to go to 100% face-to-face in the fall. But they're gonna they have the infrastructure, they have the facilities to kind of scale up the social distancing, so it's not such a major problem for them. I think it would be naive for an institution like İzmir Ekonomi to think that it could go 100% face-to-face unless they were asking students the breaking students into groups and then asking Group A to come on Mondays, Group B to come on Tuesdays, etc. So that's the only way that 100% face-to-face could probably work. But most likely, we're going to be going to this hybrid blended model, which includes much less face-to-face, which I think is good. I think that, on one hand, it allows us to be much more creative. It not only allows us, it kind of forces us to be much more creative. Yeah. And it saves resources. I mean, by that, I mean physical resources, in a campus such as ours, and in many campuses, there are physical resource limitations. In some schools of foreign languages, they run shift systems. So you might have half of your students coming to the prep program from, let's say, 8:30 to 11:30 in the morning. And then you have another shift that starts at 1 o'clock and they run till 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And this is not pandemic modeling. This is all the time modeling. They've got so many students and they don't have enough physical resources. So this type of a model may work well for those institutions. And likewise, the risk mitigation, whether it's for ensuring that the students are not exposed to any viruses, or ensuring that the students at least have a comfort level. So that's why we will be moving in this direction. The families will feel much better. The students will feel much better. Likewise, there are going to be massive changes in assessments, I believe. There's going to be much more cooperation and collaboration. That will be the focus of assessments in terms of forcing students, or I shouldn't say forcing, but asking students to be much more creative, to be autonomous, to be either collaborating or being more creative on their own. And there's going to be much more production as opposed to rote memorization. So we'll see a change in assessments, and that's going to help us with the issues around cheating as well. I believe that. And then, of course, we're going to have to see a change in autonomy for the students and the instructors. They're going to have to change the way that they approach education. They're going to have to be much more self-reliant, whether it's teaching or learning. And all of these, I think, are for the better. I think that, if there's a silver lining to this whole situation, it's that it is asking us, it is pushing us to realize that there are different ways, perhaps better ways, to be doing education. And I think that there are some very positive outcomes that will occur because of this pandemic, and because of our shift to a different form of education. That's it for my study. But I mean, those are just the high points of it, Hojam. If you have any specific questions, I can go back to my questions. And if there's anything specific that you would like me to address, I'm very happy to talk about some of these.
We received some responses like about reliance on exams. I guess, reliance on exams is gonna, decrease or increase. What do you think about it?
Well, I think that first of all, we need to, exam, I think, to some degree has a negative connotation, right? I mean, an exam means that it's a summative assessment. And in some cases, like in the School of Foreign Languages, it even has a gatekeeping role, right? You pass, you go on to your faculty, you fail, you're stuck in prep for another year. I think that the way that we do assessments, I like assessments to some degree better than exams, is that we can spread them out. I mean, it's not only the form of assessment, as I was mentioning, but it's also the number of assessments that we might be able to conduct over a period of time, so that it doesn't become so heavily weighted on a simple final exam. You know, some of the universities and primarily the public universities, before we shifted to this online final exam discussion, there were a number of universities that were talking about, okay, we're just going to sit it out. We're going to wait it out until we can all come back to campus, and we will be having our midterms and our finals. And I'm not talking only about schools of foreign languages. I'm also talking about just university, the whole university in general. So you would have models where literally the students would take the midterm. They were planning on giving the midterm on the 7th of September in the morning, and the final at 3 in the afternoon. And then there were some schools who were like, well, that's ridiculous. So we'll give the midterm on Monday and we'll give the final on Wednesday. I mean, to me, that's not assessment. That's not assessment. That's just doing something because you have to tell somebody that you have had an exam.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, just to say somebody that you have done something, you have evaluated them in some way or other, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think to some degree, Yuk, despite the challenges associated with assessments, I think to some degree, Yuk, you know, in my humble opinion, Yuk has done the right thing by not only by asking universities to go online with their assessments, but also giving them a choice. You know, you can do some homework, you can do a project, you could do a final exam if you wanted to. But at least they've opened that door. They've forced schools and faculty members to think of different ways to assess.
Exactly. So for your research, I'd like to ask, were they prepared, you know, what about the fourth question? Were they prepared for such kind of an event? Probably there are some, you know, online efforts in many universities. We had,
Right.
I used to teach once an online course. So does it depend on that, the previous online courses, choices?
Can I answer your question with a question to begin with? When you were teaching online, were you teaching undergraduate or graduate?
Graduate.
You were teaching graduate. This is the paradox of I think it's the paradox of the higher education system, primarily in Turkey, because if you go to the United States, most universities, most colleges, they don't have everything available online, but they have a selection. You know, you can run into online in just about any program, in just about any college or faculty. But in Turkey, prior to the pandemic, there were essentially two places where you would see online education: graduate schools and undergraduate for the history and the Turkish lessons. But very little of that knowledge or that skill transferred to the undergraduate programs. What I have seen when I asked the question, how prepared were your faculty members to go online? Probably about 90% of the responses were not prepared at all. Zero preparation. They were not ready for it, which led to some of the resistance that I talked about earlier. Even though a university might have graduate programs in online education, they might even have a distance learning unit, such as we have in our Teaching and Learning Center at IUE. But whether or not that actually made it into the undergraduate programs is one thing, and God forbid, it was not going to make it into the language programs. There were very, very few language programs that had any experience, that had any preparedness when it came to going online.
So of course it affects the process as well, you know, the teaching and learning process as well.
Absolutely, because you know, I think unfortunately one of the misperceptions about language is that it has to be taught face to face. I don't think that that's true at all. I'm not arguing for 100% online either, but I believe that there's a certain amount of content that you can deliver, whether it's asynchronously or synchronously online, and you can make much better use of that valuable time that you have together in the classroom. So rather than having students run through exercises in the classroom that, you know, you've given them homework and discussing that homework, you can be doing a lot of that online, and they're still getting exposure to the language. You can be much more active, much more involved and engaged when you're in that classroom environment, whether it's face-to-face or the synchronous environment.
You know, especially, you know, again, we receive responses, some families, as far as understood, are concerned that their kids, you know, the students can't get, you know, they can't learn, and they're asking what to do. You know, how can we, you know, let's say one of the concerns, as far as I know, if you send your child to a foreign country, then he is or she's going to learn there. But right now, they have a chance like this. So how can we help them?
Right.
That's one of the questions.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that you can do a lot of learning online when it comes to language. You know, at this point, right now, in fact, you really don't have very many alternatives. But there is a lot that you can learn online. There's certainly a lot that you can acquire through watching movies or watching YouTube videos. You know, watch Khan Academy. Khan Academy has very short videos, and it might not only be about language. It might be about different topic areas, but that's okay. You're learning vocabulary. You're seeing grammar structures repeated again and again. So there are plenty of opportunities out there to get exposure to the language and at least build a vocabulary, build a sense of the grammar. And then when we have an opportunity further down the road, and you can go overseas or you can meet some English speakers, whether they're native or non-native, you'll feel more comfortable. You'll be able to do it better. That's what I believe. If I could go on to the issue about preparation for students, I think this came to me as in my results. I will talk about this, but I think it's a major concern for me. At the beginning, I mentioned an article that I wrote about retaining students in the online environment. I think it's really important. You know, students are often misrepresented as these so-called digital natives, right? So we all think that, you know, they'll get it, they'll pick it up, they'll be able to do it, you know, no problems. But that's not the truth. I mean, they may be digital natives in the sense that they grew up with some form of technology in their hands, but that doesn't mean that they are going to be able to slot themselves right into an online course and be successful in an online course, whether it's for language or any other topic area. You still, or we as an institution or any institution, still needs to prepare the students for this. And I feel that my personal feeling is that many institutions dropped the ball on this one. They either felt that students will get it, they don't need our help, or the best that they would do is throw some manual up online, some PDF, and expect the students to read it and absorb it, and then simply move on with their lives. And I think that we've done a great disservice to our students, and I think that that's unfortunate, because without our students, if the students have negative feelings about the online environment, then we're not going to get very far with online teaching. So I felt that that was a big hole in how universities and schools responded to this situation. So
about the research, your research, this is also one of the questions. I mean, a very similar question. Is there a difference between public and private universities? Is there statistically significant difference between the two? I mean, though the
Sure.
number is pretty,
Yeah.
do you feel that?
Right. I think that yes. The short answer to your question is yes. For the most part, there are a number of differences. Number one, probably being that in many public institutions, the students just simply do not have the resources. They might be coming from rural areas, which means that they don't have internet access. They might be coming from lower socioeconomic conditions where they don't have a computer. Forget about a computer. They might not even have a smartphone. They may have a cell phone, one of your old Nokias or something like that. But this was a common theme across the state institutions, was that many of their students just simply did not have access to the technology that they needed. Another difference is the size of the classes. The size of the classes. So whereas we do our best to maintain an average class size across all of our language programs, around 24. In the state institutions, you might see upwards of 30 or 40 in a language classroom, which is a it's a huge challenge, and quite frankly, there's no research that supports class sizes of that size for acquiring a language. It just doesn't work. It's too burdensome, particularly when you're trying to get students to learn how to speak with each other. Another difference I saw between the publics and the privates is this question of innovation. The privates, to some degree, need to be innovative. They need to be agile, because they are always in a very competitive market, and so they have to be able to differentiate themselves from the competition. We at Izmir Ekonomi have to differentiate ourselves from Yaşar, and so we have to find ways to make our programs attractive. That's not the same at a public institution. A public institution is, the idea is simply that the public institution is there, and the students have gained enough points in their university entrance exam to access that university, and so those are the students that they get. So it's a little bit different there. And if I can add one other point that a number of the directors came up with, this is not my perception, this was something that the directors themselves mentioned, was that in the state institutions, there's just simply a difference in terms of human resources and contractual obligations, I should put it that way. And by that I mean that in my institution, if one of my teachers came up to me and said, I'm not going to teach, take your computer and go home, I'm not going to teach, that's the end of it. Well, that may or may not be the end of that teacher's career at our institution, but that's not the same at a state institution. There are many of the directors who said, my teacher said, I'm not going to teach, and they really don't have control over them. They don't have control over, they have very little accountability. And so this was reported to me. I'm not claiming that this is a fact or not, but this is what was reported to me, was that this was a situation.
It's also about the leadership approach, isn't it? How the leaders act in this way, under these conditions.
Yes.
That's also one of the concerns. How will they act?
Right. How you motivate? How do you give the instructors a feeling of confidence, of comfort as you're going through this? Definitely. When I ask instructors about, or when I ask directors about what has been your approach as a leader, there was a difference there. Going back to that, I mentioned restructuring. there was a lot of restructuring done, and it was primarily done at the foundation schools. In the public schools, a lot of the responses were, well, I had a meeting before, and I had a meeting a month later with my instructors, and that was it. So there was just a different approach to dealing with the instructors and making them feel that they were on board and that they were being supported.
So what do you think about the future? Hopefully they will do something to support teachers and also students.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that going back to this comment of emergency remote learning, or that terminology, and also bringing in the de-skilled terminology concept as well, is that this will all change. I mean, one thing I think that we are fortunate for is that this happened in the spring semester. It didn't happen in the fall semester. If it had happened in the fall semester, we would have gone through all of this online teaching. We would have had just enough time to catch our breaths, and then we'd have to get right back into it. Whereas, we have one semester of experience behind us, and now we we have this summertime to kind of like step back, reflect, regroup, take what we've learned, take what we've learned either in the classroom, on the ground, or through reading research and following others, and we will be able to spend the summer actually coming up with a much better product. In general, the rule of thumb is that it takes between 3 and 6 months to develop a good, solid online course. So there's no way that we could have expected anyone to come up with such a product in this situation. But by the fall semester, things may be a little bit different. So I think that we will be able to learn from each other. We will be able to develop communities of learning, communities of sharing, communities of let's build on each other's experiences. And I think I see a much stronger product coming out the other end
in the next semester. So such studies like yours are really valuable for shedding light on the situation, for situation analysis. Hopefully things will be better in the next semester. One of the responses about, let's say one of our students probably is happy that they will be taking courses from other universities. Well, that's also an opportunity, isn't it?
Absolutely.
When you can be taking it from another university, another country, a European country, for instance. That will also change things.
Well, if I can comment on that, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, let's put the taking classes from another university aside. I mean, we've always had our Coursera's and our and our TEDx's and those out there. So that's always been available to us. I mean, always being probably for the last 10 years or so. But I think at the same time, internally looking at our own courses, what we are seeing is that, and we are actually practicing this now, is that the world becomes your classroom, right? Before you were somewhat limited by the 4 walls in which you were teaching, and you would not think about, I mean, if you wanted to have a guest speaker, then it became this logistical, nightmare or challenge of lining up the speaker, getting the speaker, and you were pretty much limited to the speakers that were on your campus in general. But now the world is your guest speaker, so to speak. So if you can arrange someone and you can arrange the time, you can have just about anybody come into your classroom for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes and do a quick lesson with your students. So this is stuff that we didn't think about before. We could have done it before, but we didn't really do it before. But now our thinking is shifting, and this is happening. I mean, we had a number of our Spanish instructors this semester who invited speakers in from Spain. One of our Spanish instructors invited one of the diplomats from the consulate in Istanbul to come and join her class and talk to her students about commerce and international relations. So these are all things that are happening now, and the logistics behind it are very small. I'm sorry?
It's such an experience, I guess, talking to a diplomat in your course.
Right, right. It just opens their eyes. It opens, this gets back to the question of, do I really have to go someplace else to get exposed to the language? I don't think so. You can bring the language to the students. And it's obviously not ideal, but it sure is a lot cheaper. And you don't have to mess around trying to get a visa. And so, there are a lot of advantages to using this approach. There really are a lot of advantages.
Exactly. So you think that, when also one of the responses, when this pandemic is over, totally over, let's consider that it's totally over by tomorrow, but there will be still some online teaching, isn't it? It has started once, and it's not very easy, to be over and have only 100% face-to-face courses afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, as one researcher put it, why would we go back to 100% face-to-face when we put all this effort into moving in this direction? We've got this tool here. Let's take full advantage of this tool. Let's use it. And there's a lot of research that actually supports the idea that going online, not 100%, but blended, some form of a hybrid, can be much more effective than the 100% face-to-face in the classroom. So why wouldn't we keep going down this road? That's what I believe.
Probably.
We already talked about this part here. How prepared were your students to move online, and what have you done to support them? I've already commented on that. But you, Selin Hoca, have provided me with some questions from your own students. Thank you very much. And I thought that maybe we could spend a few minutes talking about some of these questions, if that's okay with you.
My students had concerns. They were unable to, they don't see their families, your instructors. They were really sad for you. I think that's the point, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I think that, first of all, thank you very much for bringing this in, because as I said, through my research, I was pretty much looking at it from an administrative perspective, a faculty perspective, and it was not very easy for me to look at it from the student perspective. So I'm really happy that these students have provided these questions, and this is really interesting to be able to discuss this at this point. But specifically to this question about teachers who are, if you will, that are stuck not in their home country but in some other country, and what has this done to their mental health, maybe to their physical health. And I don't have data on this, and I can only speak about this anecdotally, but I want to share a couple of anecdotes. I would like to share a couple anecdotes with you. First of all, in Turkey, quite a few foreigners have been here for some time now. And so they are well acclimated to living in Turkey. And in fact, even though we offer the opportunity for our foreign instructors to go home or to go someplace in the summertime, a lot of them do not take advantage of that because their home is now here in Turkey. To some degree, that's the way I look at it. I mean, I still have my family back in Michigan in the United States, But to me, I look at Turkey as my home, more or less. And so, you know, a lot of the instructors, I haven't seen any crisis situations where they've had difficulty adjusting to the current situation. And I think part of that is because, in fact, this all came during the second semester. No one's traveling in the second semester anyway, or no one's traveling during the semester anyway. If this remains during the summer, if there's a travel ban in the summer, probably you would see a much greater impact. But because it's happening during this semester, people are focusing on their classes, they're focusing on their teaching, and they're probably not focused so much on what is happening around them. I can tell you this though, we do have a couple of teachers who are over 60 years old, and there was a stretch of 6 or 8 weeks where they were not permitted to leave their flats. And those folks, although again there were no crisis modes, they were not very happy. They got cabin fever, and they didn't like it, which is understandable. I mean, they were locked like prisoners in their own flats. There was one situation where the father of one of our instructors, who's a Spanish instructor, his family's in Barcelona, his father passed away, and he could not go home for the funeral. So that was a very sad time for us, but that was the reality of the situation.
Yeah, it's totally understandable, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Feeling stressed and unhappy,
right,
under such
right.
a situation. Sure. In my case, when my students prepare the questions, I feel really good about it, because there is an empathy. It demonstrates that there is an empathetic communication between the foreign lecturers and themselves. It's always good to see that they think about each other. They think about other people.
I'm very I am happy to see that. I was very happy to see that too, and I'm glad that you shared these with me. Moving on to the second question, essentially, will things change in the English language classroom? As I mentioned before, I think by all means it will change. It will change because what we just saw in this last semester was just this so-called emergency response. And we didn't have enough time to really think about how the material was delivered, keeping the students engaged. But this will all change. By the fall, things will change. And I think at the other end of this, other end of the summer, the students will see a much better product when they get online. They will be much more engaged in their classes. However, I do want to make this one point clear, and that is that there is a certain degree of responsibility on the students, and I'm not talking simply about autonomy, but if one of the things, going back to one of the challenges being the technology for the students, my mic doesn't work, my camera doesn't work. Well, if you're going to be a university student, to some degree, I believe the responsibility is on you to find a way to get a camera and to get a mic that works, because if this is the way it's going to be moving forward, then you have to be able to respond to this. I think that the students have a role in this, and they should be willing and able to get the technology that's going to help them with their classes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We've already talked about this one. This is, because of the pandemic, it's going to be really difficult to travel. What can we do as an alternative to travel? Well, as I mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities online. There are a lot of things you can do through YouTube or through classes that are offered. It's not going to last forever. The pandemic will not last forever. They will come up with a cure. They'll come up with a vaccine, and then eventually we'll be able to travel again. It's just that in the short term, listen to music, watch Netflix. There are plenty of things out there. There are plenty of things out there.
I used to write letters to American. I had an American friend, to my friend in the United States. So I also learned English in some way. I owe my English to an extent to her. But right now there are many opportunities, isn't it? They don't have to write letters. There are many ways to learn English online.
Sure.
Also, TV series is very, I've also received many responses about TV series. It's one of the, exciting and entertaining way to learn English. As far as I understand.
Or learn a lot of different languages. I mean, if you turn on La Casa de Papel, or actually in English, it's called The Heist, I believe. There are probably 3 or 4 different language options for these series. It doesn't have to be just English. I mean, there are other languages you can be working on at the same time.
Exactly. I have a student, for instance, who understands a little bit Korean, even talks to our foreign professor at communication faculty because of Korean TV series. She doesn't know anyone in Korea.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's very interesting. Right now it can happen. Yes.
A friend of mine is, she lives in Qatar. She's a researcher in Qatar. And she showed me a paper recently that she had written about girls in Qatar who had learned Korean because of their fascination with K-pop. So only through their fascination with K-pop, they had been motivated to learn the language. And one other thing I would like to add to this is that although I'm not a big fan of online gaming, particularly some of the more violent ones, every once in a while I will meet someone who has excellent English, and I will say, where did you get that? Did you go to an Anatolian high school? Did you live in another country, et cetera, et cetera? And they say, no, I got it from playing World of Warcraft or whatever. I mean, I don't know what the latest games are, but I mean, there are so many opportunities for them to be speaking online, to be interacting with people online, that they really strengthen their English language skills.
Again, let's keep gaming, for limited times still.
Well, but actually, gaming, maybe not in the violent sense, but gaming is a valuable tool that if we brought into the classrooms in an effective way, I mean, using the right games, we can really cover a lot of ground. We can achieve a lot of learning outcomes through gaming, because gaming is gaming, right? Why are we attracted to gaming? Because we get quick rewards. It helps our dopamine, and so these are the things that lead to good positive learning, as long as you're doing good positive gaming.
Exactly, especially in class. There are many ways. It's a universal thing, and gaming is with us. We play games for centuries. Not a new thing.
Right. Okay, and let's get this. This was the last question I wanted to focus on here, Hojam. Do you think this situation will change something in foreign language education? Well, as I suggested, I think it will. I think that we will have to be much more agile. We'll have to be much more flexible. We will have to be much more creative and more autonomous. I mean, all of these sound like nice cliche terms, but really these will happen in order for foreign language education to strengthen and to get better over time. So this is happening. This is happening now, and it's going to continue happening. I'm certain of it. So
mostly, we will have more positive learning experiences, both online and offline. Let's say.
That's right.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Fruitful conversation. We have learned a lot from you, and also for your valuable research findings. I need to, Professor, I think you need to conduct research on students as well. Maybe that's the case.
That's the next step. That's the next step, to find out how they've, because we've really, going back to my original graphs, we have struggled with student participation in the classes, and it's an important question. I mean, if you're not getting the students into the classes, participating into the classes, then what good is it, right? So we have to find out what they're thinking and how they're acting and what drives them. So,
also what we can do to make them, participate more in classes.
Right.
Right. This is one thing that we will, hopefully, we will host you again, talking about this new research study.
Thank you.
We have spent more than an hour. Yeah, we'd like to thank you.
Thank you.
This is the end of Pandemic Academy. Next week, Ebroja will be with you, and you will be talking with our guest speaker about a psychological issue. How the families manage, cope with, the pandemic, and what happens to their relations with parents and also children. That's gonna be the topic of next week program. So I'd like to thank everyone for watching. See you next week. Bye.